Hello, everybody, and welcome to Maximum Energy again. So, this is going to be the first video after the introductory video on core training. I want to make some distinctions here. There is a sequence in core training, just as there is a sequence in core activation. In fact, the reason there should be a sequence in core training is that there is a sequence of core activation that makes core activation effective or ineffective. So what we need to do is to make sure we train in a sequence that is functionally specific. So I'm being distracted by incoming messages because they're popping up on my phone and I don't know how to turn off the pop-ups. In any case, okay, so how do we train in such a way that is functionally specific? We need to train in a sequence that mimics the sequence of activation necessary to make core activation effective in the real world, in sports, in functional activities. So, I asked this question on my Facebook post, in one of my Facebook posts recently. Do you train your abs, your abdominal muscles, from top down or bottom up? And I received no answers, but I'm going to give you the brief answer that another pop-up, most gym goers train top down. For example, you do crunches. Then you may do sit-ups, and then you do hanging leg raises and hanging knee raises. The issue with this is that this is a top-down sequence, and in the real world, in the functional real world, if you activate your core muscles in a top-down fashion, you're actually not protecting your spine, nor are you transferring the energy from your legs all the way up to your arms. So between your hip girdle and your shoulder girdle, we have the spine. And we have the thoracolumbar fascia, which runs from the occiput all the way to the hips, to the pelvic girdle. At the back, it's a piece of fascia called the thoracolumbar fascia, and that connects the lower legs, the lower extremities with the arms. Now you might say, isn't that the spine? Sure, but if you look at a spine and there was nothing holding up the spine, even if you looked at a spinal model like the one I showed some weeks back, if there was no glue, if there was no discs in between, if there was nothing that was rigid, that spinal model would collapse to the ground. It's in the same way as our human bodies. If you put a corpse standing and you let the corpse go, that corpse would collapse into a heap on the ground because there would be nothing holding that corpse up. And you say, oh, isn't that the legs? But even if the legs were rigid and well balanced, as in they balanced the corpse up, if there were no muscles in the spine and the upper body and the neck, that corpse would collapse. At least the top part of the spine would collapse, would round over. So what we need to do is we need to activate the muscles that surround the spine, that connect with the thoracolumbar fascia to hold up the spine, and in sports and functional movement, transfer energy from the legs all the way up to the upper body so you can use them in your upper body, whether you are lifting, whether you are moving your arms in a run, or whether you are punching and striking. You need to have energy from the lower part of your body transferred up to your spine, through your spine, to your shoulder girdle. How do we do that? I mean, even if you looked at certain internal Tai Chi or Wing Chun arts, internal Wing Chun, you have teachers of such internal arts relaying to us that if we were to transfer energy through the arm, it should go right down to our feet and then bounce back up to the arm, as in Newton's laws of motion, reaction. Isn't that Newton's third law? Can't remember my physics now, but I think it's third law. If not, it's the second law. To every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So that's what they want to do in martial arts. They want that force from your opponent to be transferred down to the legs and then up again. But where are the muscles, and how do we contract the muscles that create stability in the spine so that that force can be transferred down and the reaction back up? And if we were to throw a punch, for example, or if you were to throw a basketball, how do you do that with the power of your legs and not just from your arms? So the power of your legs has to travel up through your spine, into your shoulder girdle, and into your arms. So it's not just the jump, even the throw. And you could be playing anything. You could be passing. You could be playing netball. Or even volleyball, and you're trying to spike. And you need to transfer that power up to your shoulder girdle from the legs. So this question has almost become like a religious debate, whether we draw in or we brace the spine. So I'm going to tell you, this playlist on core training and core activation could be quite long, because in every video I'm going to give you a snippet or a nugget from my own experiences and the experiences of others, and me distilling what various kinds of discoveries, scientific discoveries, that may be out there. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, gone are the days when I would provide references for you to go and look at. You need to do the research for you now, because I don't have the time. And I'm just going to show you, these are just compilations, distillations from the experiences of others, from scientific studies, and from my own experiences in training, that I'm actually sharing with you in this playlist. So I'm going to start off by telling you that from a very young age, at least by 10 years old, I was training in martial arts. And one of the key things we did was bracing. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is that I don't want you to think that I'm either for draw-in or bracing, and that I'm not familiar with the latest research. Because I want to make it clear to you that I have been bracing all my life as a practice of martial arts and later on military combat fighting systems. And we braced in order to take impact. So mine was really full contact fighting and sparring. And so we braced to take impact, even at our abdominal region, right? We braced to take impact. So I'm not someone who's unfamiliar with bracing, because bracing is something I do for fighting systems and martial arts, and I've been doing it practically every day since I was 10. However, for those of you bracing adherents and experts, I want you to know that there's a place and time for everything. So bracing can offer stability to the spine externally. Well, externally, not external to the body, because then you'll be wearing a weightlifting belt, for example. That would be an external assistive aid. But we're talking about around the spine. The most external or superficial layers are the rectus abdominis, for example, and bracing. Also, they are bracing in order to have greater intrathoracic pressure that protects the spine. Let me share with you that that is good as a form of structural protection from impact, from external forces. Second observation is that when you're bracing, you're not breathing normally. You're not breathing normally. It's almost impossible to brace and breathe normally, and that tells you that bracing is only a small part or an instantaneous part of taking impact. Thirdly, when you're bracing, you are barely moving. Even if you're moving, the moment you brace, you slow down your movements. So there is a place and time for bracing and for draw-in, because draw-in is a more internal, spinal enveloping kind of device, mechanical device, not for taking impact, but for moving in such a way that you transfer energy from below from your legs up to your shoulder girdle. And you say, doesn't bracing do that? It does that only in a limited fashion, okay? For taking impact, for staying still. But for movement, if you're walking, if you're lunging, if you're on slippery surfaces, if you are rounding your back, you're bending over, you're twisting your spine, and all these are movements that are necessary in sports as well as functional environments. In all those scenarios, bracing will actually hinder you. For example, twisting your spine. You don't brace, twist your spine, and breathe normally at the same time. It's highly improbable, if even possible. So when your external environment requires more balance, and you need to balance it on one foot, or you're walking on rocks that are slippery and that are uneven, that's when you need to draw in. I'm not going to continue with this as an argument because, like as I mentioned, you can do the research for yourself, or you can just insist that you know that bracing is the only way to do it. Or on the other side of the fence, that draw-in is the only way to do it. I don't believe that as well. So if you are a Pilates adherent and you teach only draw-in, well, happy trying to apply that in a martial arts fight, okay? In a hand-to-hand combat fight. Try apply drawing in a hand-to-hand combat fight where you have to take hits without bracing and just drawing in. So I'm not going to get into that kind of argument because it is not fruitful nor relevant. Because what actually matters, what's actually relevant is that when you're actually on the field, whether you're fighting or you're kicking a football or you're taking a rugby tackle, what should you do in that instant of a fraction of a second? That's what matters. When you're running down a football pitch, should you be bracing, or should you be drawing in, or should you be half of drawing in? We're going to discuss all of that in this channel. So I want to get this matter clear first. It is not about bracing versus draw in, or draw in being right and bracing being wrong. It's about choosing the correct method of activating your core for each specific activity that you're doing, or moment of that activity, or motion, specific motion and technique application of that sport or that activity. So I want to clarify here that drawing in is useful if you need to balance, if you are moving, if you are dynamic. So drawing in is for dynamic movement, transfer of energy when you're moving dynamically. And bracing is useful for stability when you're taking impact. So with all that clarification for this first part, I want to end this particular episode sharing that we need to know both. We need to train ourselves in both draw-in as well as bracing for the right situations. And how do we do that? Do you even have time to think in that instant when you require that form of core activation, you won't have time to think. You will have time only for your nervous system to react and to respond, reproducing what you have trained your nervous system, your neuromuscular system to perform through hundreds, if not thousands, of repetitions. And that's what we're going to do. It's the training that matters, because you want to move from unconscious incompetence to a state of unconscious competence. So stage 1, unconscious incompetence. We don't even know how incompetent we are at core activation for specific tasks and purposes. Stage 2, we become consciously competent. So we know that we are, consciously incompetent. We know that we are incompetent in stage 2. We've discovered that in certain situations, we're not that stable. We can't take hits that well. We're conscious about it. Stage 3, conscious competence. We've trained ourselves through hundreds of repetitions to become competent at taking hits, at stabilizing ourselves in motion while we are conscious about it. In other words, we have to willfully, consciously direct and trigger and activate our core for that specific motion or activity. That's conscious competence. But it's certainly not the end goal, because as I mentioned, in a real fight, or when you're in a real rugby tackle, or you're sprinting, or you are throwing a basketball, whatever you're doing, you won't have time in that instant to think about how and which method and which sequence of steps to take to activate your core. So we need to reach stage 4, which is the end goal, which is unconscious competence. We reach a stage where we're not thinking about it, but we are competent in producing the kind of core activation that is required for that particular task in sports or in functional movement at work. So thank you very much for watching this. I hope you will continue on this interesting journey with me in the ensuing weeks.